My name is Vivian Marsh. I am 36 years old. There is a bell at the end of the infusion hallway at the Columbus Cancer and Wellness Center. It is brass. It hangs on a dark walnut plaque that has been there for 11 years. According to the plaque itself, patients ring it on their final day of chemotherapy. The nurses come out from behind their stations. Sometimes there is clapping. Sometimes there are tears. Always there are people in the doorway. Family, a husband, a mother. Someone who drove far and got there early because there was no version of the universe in which they would miss this. I walked down that hallway on a Tuesday morning in October, and I rang that bell, and there was no one in the doorway from my family. Not one person from the life I had built with my husband over 5 years. Not Derek. Not his mother Carol. Not his sister Ashley. But there was someone else. And what he was holding in his hand when I turned around, that is the part of this story that changes everything. That is the part I have been building toward for 18 weeks without anyone knowing I was building anything at all. Before I get there, take a moment to subscribe if you're new here. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I read every single one, and I am always grateful to know who is out there listening. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, not to the bell, further. To a Wednesday evening in February when my doctor said 2 words that rearranged every plan I had ever made for my life, and to the moment I drove home and sat in my driveway and understood, for the very first time, exactly what kind of marriage I was in. My name before I was Vivian Marsh was Vivian Crane. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, the daughter of a high school biology teacher named Ruth and an electrician named Carl who could fix anything that plugged into a wall and had the hands to prove it. My parents were not wealthy. We were comfortable in the specific way of people who pay their bills on time and take one vacation a year and consider a good dinner at home to be one of life's genuine pleasures. I put myself through law school. Not entirely my parents helped when they could, but I graduated with debt and with the specific clarity about money and effort and what things actually cost that comes from having paid for most of your own education. I joined a firm in Columbus at 26. I specialized in corporate contract disputes. I was good at it from the beginning and exceptional at it by year 4. Which is when I made associate and started billing at a rate that still occasionally surprises me when I think about the girl who graduated high school in Cincinnati in a dress she bought at a consignment shop. I met Derek Marsh at a fundraising dinner for a children's hospital. He was there with clients. I was there with partners. He came and found me at the drinks table after the keynote speech and introduced himself with the easy confidence of a man who has never once in his life walked into a room and felt he didn't belong in it. He was handsome. He was funny. He remembered things I said 3 conversations later and brought them back in a way that made me feel seen. He sent flowers to my office on our 3rd date, not roses, which would have been predictable, but sweet peas, which I had mentioned in passing, were my mother's favorite. He was the kind of man who listened, really listened, and filed things away and used them to make you feel known. I fell in love with him over about 6 months, with very little resistance. His family I met at a dinner in Bexley, the Columbus suburb, where they lived about 4 months into our relationship. His father, Robert Marsh, had died 3 years earlier from a heart attack. What remained of the Marsh family structure was Carol, the mother, and Ashley, the younger sister, and the particular dynamic that forms when a family loses its patriarch and rearranges itself around the absence. Carol Marsh was 60 years old when I first sat at her dinner table. She was a woman of significant surface beauty, blonde hair maintained at considerable expense, a wardrobe that communicated money without announcing it, the posture of someone who had spent decades deciding that how she appeared to others was worth investing in. She was charming at that first dinner. She asked about my work with what seemed like genuine interest. She complimented my dress. She touched Derek's arm with a tenderness that was real. I liked her. I want to be honest about that. I liked Carol Marsh at the beginning, and I thought she liked me back, and I spent the first year of my relationship with her son explaining away the small things that didn't fit that picture because I wanted the picture to be true. Ashley Marsh was 29 when I met her. She worked in event planning, which suited her because she was the kind of person who had a strong opinion about the placement of every object in every room, and who expressed those opinions with the breezy confidence of someone who had never been told that their preferences were not the center of the universe. She was not mean, exactly. She was something more specific than mean. She was a person who had been the most important thing in her immediate world for so long that she had genuinely lost the ability to perceive when other people's needs were in competition with her own. I noticed things in that first year. Small things. I am a contract attorney. Noticing the details other people overlook is my professional gift and my personal habit, and I cannot turn it off regardless of context. I noticed that when I spoke at family dinners, Carol would listen for precisely the amount of time required by social courtesy and then redirect. Not rudely, never rudely. She was too skilled for that. But the redirect was consistent. My stories ended and Carol's began. My opinions landed and Carol pivoted. It was so smooth that I would have missed it if I had not been specifically trained to notice the architecture of conversations. I noticed that Derek's phone, when Carol called, was answered on the second ring without exception. That other calls from me, from his friends, from his office, might go to voicemail if he was busy, but Carol's calls were never missed. I noticed this not with anger, but with the calm attention of someone filing information for later. I noticed that Ashley's problems, her apartment, her work crises, her relationship difficulties, her parking tickets and her landlord disputes, and her endless logistical emergencies consistently moved to the top of Derek's priority queue, and that this was so normalized in the Marsh family that no one, including Derek, seemed to notice it was happening. I cataloged all of this, not in a notebook, in my memory, which is, professionally speaking, very good. I cataloged it and I told myself it was manageable, that families were complicated, that Derek loved me and that was what mattered, and that the rest was surface texture, not structural. I was wrong about that. But I did not know it yet. We got married in September, 2 years after that fundraising dinner. Small ceremony, 60 guests, a venue Derek chose and which I loved, a dress my mother helped me pick out over a weekend in Cincinnati that I will remember as one of the happiest weekends of my adult life. My father gave a toast that made everyone at our table cry. My mother danced with Derek's best man until 11 o'clock at night and came back to the table flushed and laughing and whispered to me, "Viv, I think I might be 25 again." Carol gave a toast too. It was eloquent. It was warm. It mentioned me in 4 sentences. It mentioned Derek in 14. I counted because I am a person who counts things. We went to Portugal for our honeymoon. It was beautiful. Derek was attentive and present and exactly the man I had fallen in love with for 10 uninterrupted days, and I came home sunburned and happy and ready to build the life we had talked about building. And then the life we actually had resumed. The diagnosis came on a Wednesday in February, 3 years into our marriage. I had found the lump myself in December, had it biopsied in January, had been waiting for 3 weeks for the results, with the specific controlled anxiety of a person who is very good at functioning regardless of what is happening underneath the function. Dr. Patricia Owens delivered the news across a desk in her office, on the 4th floor of the cancer center. She is a small woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain, and the particular quality of unhurried clarity that I have come to understand is the signature of oncologists who have done this for a long time and have decided that the most important thing they can give a patient in the first conversation is the truth, delivered without rushing. Stage 2, HER2, positive breast cancer. She said, "This is treatable." She said, "Your profile is strong." She said, "We are going to go after this aggressively, and we are going to get you through it." She said all of this with the calm confidence of someone who meant every word and had a plan and expected me to participate in executing it. I asked questions. I always ask questions. I asked about the treatment protocol, the timeline, the side effects, the success rates broken down by profile. She answered all of them. By the end of the appointment, I had a treatment schedule written on a card in my bag and a follow-up appointment in my phone, and a diagnosis that I had processed, in the clinical space of that office, with the professional part of my brain that handles information first and feelings second. The feelings came in the driveway. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 22 minutes. I know it was 22 minutes because I watched the clock. I did not cry. I thought. I thought about the treatment schedule and the timeline, and what this would mean for my caseload, and my body, and my life. I thought about my mother and how I was going to tell her. I thought about what the next 18 weeks were going to require of me, and whether I had it. I decided I had it. That was not bravado. That was assessment. I am good at assessing situations accurately, and this was the accurate assessment. I was sick. The illness was serious but survivable. The treatment was going to be brutal but finite. And I was going to get through it because I get through things. That is what I do. Then I drove home and I told Derek. He was in the kitchen when I came in. He was making dinner pasta, something simple, and he turned when he heard the door and looked at my face and put the spoon down immediately. He crossed the kitchen and took both my hands and said, "Tell me." I told him. He held me for a long time. He said, "We are going to get through this together." He said, "I am not going anywhere." He said, "You are going to fight this, and I am going to be right next to you every step." He said, "I love you, Viv. You are not doing this alone." He said all of the right things. He said them with conviction. He said them with his whole face, looking at me. And I believed him with my whole self, because he was my husband, and I loved him, and I needed it to be true. I believed him for exactly 1 infusion and 40 minutes into the second one, and then I started keeping notes. The first chemotherapy infusion was on a Monday in March. Derek took the entire day off work. He was there when I arrived. He was there through the 3 hours of the infusion itself, his hand on my forearm, his phone in his pocket, his attention genuinely, entirely on me. He brought a thermos of the tea I liked and a novel I had been meaning to read, and he sat in the chair next to the infusion chair, and he was present in the complete, full-bodied way that a person is present when they understand what the moment requires. I thought, I was wrong to worry. I thought, this is who he is when it counts. I thought, the small things I cataloged over 3 years were the noise, and this is the signal. I was so relieved that I let myself cry in the car on the way home, not from the chemo. From the relief of not being alone in it. The second infusion was 3 weeks later. Derek arrived 43 minutes after the infusion started. I know the exact number because I noted it. 11:47 start time, 12:30 arrival, 43 minutes. He came in flushed and slightly disheveled, unwinding his scarf, and he said, "I'm so sorry. Mom called right as I was leaving and I couldn't get off the phone. Ashley is having a situation with her lease and apparently the landlord is," and I said, "It's fine, you're here now." And I meant it, mostly, because 43 minutes was not nothing, but it was also not a verdict. He stayed for 2 hours. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. He looked at me. It's Mom again. She's upset about something with the lease papers. I told her I'd help her sort it out. He stood up, already reaching for his jacket. "I'll be back before you're done." He was not back before I was done. I sat in that chair for another hour and 40 minutes with the Taxol going into my blood and the chair hissing occasionally when I shifted, and the sound of other patients' families in adjacent bays, a husband reading aloud from a newspaper, a daughter telling a story that made her mother laugh, and I looked at the door, and I did not perform the feelings I was having. My nurse, a woman named Diane, who was efficient and warm in the particular balance that experienced oncology nurses achieve, came to unhook me when the bag was empty. She looked at the empty chair. She looked at me. She said, very quietly, "You need a ride?" I said, "No, I have a car." "Thank you, Diane." She nodded. She patted my hand once. She didn't say anything else because she had been doing this long enough to know that some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood completely. I drove home. I made dinner. Derek came home at 7 and said, "Sorry, I didn't make it back. The lease thing turned into a whole situation. Mom was really stressed." He said it the way a person says something they have decided in advance is a sufficient explanation. He said it while looking at his phone. I said, "It's fine." I put his plate on the table. I went to the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub for 4 minutes. Then I took out my phone and I opened the notes application and I typed, in the format I would use for the next 17 infusions. Infusion 2. Start. 11:47 a.m. Derek arrived. 12:30 p.m. 43 minutes late. Carol, Ashley. Lease call. Derek left. 2:18 p.m. Carol called again, lease paperwork. Infusion end. 4:02 p.m. Alone. 1 HR 44 minutes. Reason given. Mom was really stressed. I saved it. I closed the app. I washed my hands and went back to the kitchen and we had dinner, and I asked about his day, and he told me about a property deal that was giving him trouble, and I listened and responded and was present in the way I had always been present in our marriage, and nothing about my face or my voice gave away what I had just done in the bathroom. I am a corporate attorney. I have been presenting a controlled exterior while processing significant information internally for 9 years. I am very good at it. Infusion 3 was the one that removed the last question mark. Derek arrived on time. He was present. He sat with me for the first hour, and I thought, okay, last time was an exception. This is the pattern, this, right here. His hand on my arm, his full attention. At the 1 hour mark, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His expression did a small thing, a flicker of something that was not quite guilt, but was adjacent to it, and then he looked at me and said, "Ashley is having a meltdown." Apparently, a vendor fell through for an event she's running and the whole thing is falling apart, and Mom says she's absolutely beside herself. I said, "Okay," he said, "I'll just be a few minutes. I'm going to step into the hallway and help her sort out a backup vendor. 5 minutes, tops." He was gone for 40 minutes. When he came back, he was on the phone. He held up one finger, the universal signal for 1 more minute, and then he was in the chair next to me, still on the phone, talking to someone about catering equipment. He was on the phone for 23 more minutes. When he finally hung up, he looked at me and said, "God, I'm sorry. Ashley had no one else to call." I said, "I understand." He stayed for the rest of the infusion. He was present again once the phone was away. He held my hand during the last 40 minutes and talked to me about a trip we had discussed taking to Italy, and I listened and talked back, and we were in that 40 minutes, the couple I had believed we were when I married him. He left 5 minutes after the infusion ended. Carol had texted that she needed him at her house. He kissed my forehead. He said, "You are so strong, Viv. I am so proud of you. I will see you tonight." I watched him walk out. I took out my phone. Infusion 3. Start. 10 a.m. Derek on time. Left hallway. 11:02 a.m. Returned. 11:43 a.m. Still on phone. Ashley vendor crisis. Phone call during infusion. 23 minutes. Left. 2:07 p.m. Carol text needed at her house. Infusion end. 2:35 p.m. Alone. 28 minutes. Last words. "You are so strong, Viv. I am so proud of you." I noted the last words because they were going to matter later. When a person tells you how proud they are of your strength while leaving you to sit alone in a chemotherapy chair, that sentence deserves to be preserved exactly. Here is what was happening in the world outside the infusion suite during those months, because I think it is important for you to understand the full architecture of what I was living inside. Derek was telling people he was devoted. I know this because Nina told me. Nina is my closest friend, a family law attorney with an office 2 floors above mine, and she heard things through the social overlap that exists in a mid-sized professional city between people who attend the same dinners and charity events and industry gatherings. Derek, at those dinners and events, was performing a specific role. He told people, "Vivian is incredible. She is handling this with such grace." He said, "I don't know how she does it." He said, "It has been so hard on all of us. We are just taking it one day at a time as a family." He said these things to colleagues and friends and neighbors, and I know the exact phrasing because Nina recorded what people told her with the precise retention of a lawyer who understood she might need to relay it accurately later. He said all of this publicly. He said, "It has been so hard on all of us." Carol, meanwhile, was telling her friends, the women from her book club, from her garden club, from the charity board she sat on, that Derek was absolutely heroic. That he had been so strong for Vivian. That the whole family had rallied around her. That Carol herself had been doing everything she could to support her daughter-in-law through this terrible time. I know this because one of Carol's book club friends is the mother of a junior associate at my firm, and information travels in professional cities in ways that people consistently underestimate. The performance was elaborate and consistent and public. The reality was a note on my phone that by Infusion 5 read, "Total time alone in infusion chair across 5 sessions, 9 hours, 14 minutes. Number of times Carol's calls were cited as reason for late arrival or early departure, 7. Number of times Ashley's emergencies were cited, 4. Number of times Derek was present for the full infusion duration, 0, 0. 5 infusions, and he had not once stayed for the complete duration of a single one. Infusion 5 was the experiment. I did not tell Derek the actual start time. I told him the infusion began 2 hours later than it did. I did this because I had a hypothesis I needed to test, and I needed to test it cleanly, without the variable of his knowing the correct time. My hypothesis was this. Derek was late and absent not because of Carol or Ashley or the specific emergencies they generated. He was late and absent because my chemotherapy was not, in the hierarchy of things he maintained with precision, a top-tier priority. It was something he intended to attend fully but held loosely in his schedule, so that anything that pressed against it could displace it with minimal resistance. If I was right, he would arrive approximately on time according to the time I gave him, which was to say 90 minutes after the infusion actually started. He would have no knowledge of the 90-minute gap. He would not have received a call from Carol or Ashley, because there had been no opportunity for them to generate an emergency in the time between when he left the house and when he arrived. He arrived at 10:34 a.m. The infusion had started at 9 a.m. The time I had given him was 10 a.m. He was 34 minutes late by the time I gave him. He was an hour and 34 minutes late by the actual clock. He had stopped for coffee. Not hospital coffee, the good place downtown, 12 minutes out of his way, because he had time and the good coffee was worth the detour when you weren't in a rush. He walked in with the coffee and a warm smile and said, "Traffic was a little rough. Sorry, I'm a few minutes behind." He had no idea he was 94 minutes late. Because no one had called to create an emergency. Because when there was no external pressure, the default setting was, "There's time, I'll stop for coffee." He sat with me for the rest of the infusion. He was present and affectionate and attentive, and at the end he said, "I'm going to run over to Mom's for a bit. She has some mail she needs help sorting through." He said it like it was nothing, because to him, it was nothing. I added the entry to my notes. I added a line I had not added before. Hypothesis confirmed. The absences are not caused by Carol or Ashley. They are caused by the position this infusion occupies in his hierarchy of priorities. Carol and Ashley are accelerants, not causes. The cause is structural. I sat with that for 3 days. On the 4th day, I called Ellen Porter. Ellen Porter is a family law attorney with Whitmore and Associates, which is one of the 3 best family law firms in Columbus. She is 44 years old. She is small and precise and has the specific quality of a person who has sat across from 1,000 people in the worst moments of their lives and has learned to receive their stories with complete attention and zero sentimentality. She is not warm in the way that some attorneys are warm. She is accurate. In my experience, accuracy is worth more than warmth in a lawyer. I sat in her office on a Friday afternoon and I told her everything. From the beginning. The first infusion and the second. The notes. The experiment with the wrong time. The public performance Derek was giving versus the private reality he was producing. I told her about Carol and Ashley and the 9 hours and 14 minutes, and I told her what I wanted and how I wanted it delivered. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The notes are time-stamped." I said, "Yes." She said, "All of them." I said, "All of them. Backed up in 2 locations." She said, "And the house is titled in your name only." I said, "I purchased it 2 years before we met, and I never transferred it to joint title." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized from the mirror, the expression of a professional who has just been given everything they need to do their job correctly. She said, "Tell me how you want to do the delivery." I told her about the bell, about the last infusion, about the specific public performance Derek had been giving of himself as the devoted husband, and the specific private reality of 9 hours and 14 minutes alone. And I told her what I thought the paper should be delivered and why. Ellen was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "That is going to be very difficult to argue against in discovery." I said, "That is the point." She said, "I'll have Martin Cole ready." The 6th and final infusion was on a Tuesday in October. I did not tell Derek the date. I did not tell Carol or Ashley or anyone in Derek's family. I told my mother, who offered immediately to drive from Cincinnati, and I told her, "No, Mom, I have someone with me. I have it handled." I told Nina, who said, "I will be there at 8:30, and I will not leave until it is over, and I will bring the good tea." She was there at 8:22. She had the tea and a novel and the particular quality of a person who has decided in advance that their only job today is to be present, which is the rarest and most valuable quality a human being can bring to any situation. She sat with me for the full 5 hours. She read her book. She refilled my water. She talked when I wanted to talk and was quiet when I needed quiet, and she did not once make my illness about her emotions or her discomfort or her feelings about the situation. She was just there, solid and real and entirely present for the entirety of it. At 2:17 in the afternoon, Dr. Owens came into the suite and said, "Vivian, your final infusion is complete. You are done." Nina closed her book. She stood up. She held out her hand. We walked down the hallway together. The hallway is maybe 40 feet long. It has the particular quality of hospital hallways, the clean lighting, the slight echo, the smell that is not quite antiseptic and not quite anything else. I had walked this hallway 11 times in to start infusions, out to end them. I knew every foot of it. At the end, the bell. I stopped in front of it. I looked at it for a moment. Brass. Mounted on walnut. The rope worn smooth from thousands of hands. Below it, the plaque listing the date it was installed and the quote it carried, "What we have done for ourselves alone dies with us. What we have done for others, and the world remains." I reached up and I rang it, 3 times, loud and clear and clean and real. The sound bounced off the walls and carried down the hallway and past the nursing station, and I heard Diane say, "Oh!" And then the nurses came out from behind their stations and they clapped, and Diane put both hands over her heart and her eyes were wet, and she said, "Vivian, look at you." I looked at her. I said, "Thank you, Diane, for everything." And then I turned around. In the doorway, at the far end of the hallway, stood a man I had never seen before. He was in his 40s, in a suit, and he was holding a manila folder. He had the particular posture of someone who has been told exactly where to stand, and exactly when, and who has executed those instructions with the professional precision of a person who does this for a living. His name was Martin Cole. He was a process server retained by Ellen Porter at Whitmore & Associates. He walked toward me. He said, "Vivian Marsh?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I have documents for you." He handed me the folder. I took it. I opened it. I looked at the first page long enough to confirm it was what I had asked Ellen to prepare. Then I closed it. I turned to Nina. I said, "Let's go get lunch. I know a place." She looked at me for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite something else, something in between that contained respect and love, and the specific acknowledgement of one professional woman to another that what had just happened was exactly as deliberate and exactly as deserved as it appeared. She said, "I'm driving." We walked out through the lobby, past the reception desk and the gift shop, and the volunteer with the cart of paperback books, and the family in the corner with their coffee cups and their fear. Through the automatic doors and into the October air, which was cold and bright and smelled like leaves, and the beginning of something. I did not look back. Derek was home at 6:18 that evening. He came in the way he always came in, jacket off in the entryway, keys on the hook, the sound of him loosening his tie. He came into the kitchen where I was making dinner, and he kissed my cheek, and he said, "How was your day?" I handed him the folder. He looked at it. He looked at me. He opened it. He read the first page, the second. He stopped at the third. He looked up. His face in that moment was something I will remember for the rest of my life. Not with cruelty, but with the clear-eyed memory of a woman who needed to see it in order to be certain she had done the right thing. It was not devastation. Not yet. It was the specific expression of a person who has walked confidently into a room and discovered that the floor is not where they thought it was the fraction of a second before the fall, when the body has registered the loss of ground but the mind has not yet caught up. "What is this?" he said. "Divorce papers," I said. "I have retained Ellen Porter at Whitmore and Associates. Her contact information is on the second page. All communication goes through her. Viv. Derek." My voice was level, not cold. Level. There is a difference. I need you to hear me. I am not angry right now. I am clear. This is not a reaction. This is a conclusion that I have been arriving at for 18 weeks, with all of the care and precision I bring to any significant decision. Please don't make it into something it isn't by treating it like an emotional outburst. He stood very still. The folder was in his hands. "This is because of the infusions," he said. It wasn't a question. "It is because of the infusions and every structure that produced them. Because of 3 years of watching you make decisions about priority and finding, consistently, that I was not in the first tier. Because of Carol calling during the second infusion. Because of Ashley's vendor crisis during the third. Because of the experiment I ran during the fifth, when I gave you the wrong time and you arrived 94 minutes after I actually started and brought coffee from downtown because you had time to stop." He went very still at that. "You gave me the wrong time. I needed to know," I said, "whether the absences were about Carol and Ashley, or about where the infusion actually sat in your hierarchy." I got my answer. "You were testing me." "I was gathering information," I said. "The way I do when the stakes are high and the data matters." He put the folder on the counter. He sat down. He looked at his hands with the expression of a man who is trying to find the argument and cannot locate it. "I know I wasn't there enough," he said. "I know that. Mom needed there were things happening with Ashley that I couldn't just—" "I know what your mother needed," I said. "I have an extremely detailed accounting of what she needed and when and at what cost. 9 hours and 14 minutes, Derek. That is how long I sat alone in a chemotherapy chair across 6 infusions. 9 hours and 14 minutes. I had cancer. Your mother had a lease dispute." He had nothing to say to that. "The math was the math. You told people," I said, "that it had been hard on all of us, that you were taking it one day at a time as a family, that you didn't know how I did it." He was quiet. "I know you said those things because Nina told me. I know the exact phrasing, and I want you to understand that what you said publicly and what you produced privately are 2 different things. And those 2 things are documented, time-stamped, and backed up, and they tell a story that is going to be very difficult to argue against." He left the folder on the counter. He went to the guest room. At 9:22, I heard him on the phone with Carol, his voice low and escalating in the specific way of a person receiving information they have not prepared to receive. The call lasted 38 minutes. I finished cooking. I ate. I washed my dishes. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. Carol called me the following morning at 8:42. I did not answer. She left a voicemail that was 53 seconds long. The structure of it was this: shock, then hurt, then an accounting of everything she had done for me over the years. then a statement that she had always tried her best and had no idea things had gotten this bad. Then the suggestion carefully worded, but unmistakable, that I was being ungrateful and reactive, and that Derek was devastated, and that this was not what families did. She said, "I hope you understand what you're doing to this family, Vivian. I listened to it once." I saved it to a folder I had labeled, with the specific black humor that had sustained me through treatment, Documentation Marsh Family. I forwarded the number to Ellen and sent a text to Derek's newly retained attorney, a man named Greg Holloway, who was known for aggressive discovery tactics, which told me everything I needed to know about how Derek had been advised to approach this, that all personal contact with my client should be directed through counsel. Then I called my mother. My mother, Ruth Crane, is 68 years old and is the single most honest person I have ever known. She has never pretended to feel something she doesn't feel, or failed to say something she genuinely thinks. She is not cruel, but she is not soft, and she does not use kindness as a substitute for truth. I told her everything: the bell, Martin, and the folder, Derek's face, the 9 hours and 14 minutes, all of it. She was quiet for a long moment when I finished. Then she said, "I wish I had been there for the bell." I said, "I know. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I needed it to be clean." She said, "Vivian Ruth Crane." She used my maiden name. She uses my maiden name when she is about to say something she needs me to hear all the way through. You rang that bell after 18 weeks of treatment, alone, and you served those papers on the same day, and then you went home and made dinner. Do you have any idea what kind of woman does that? I said, "A woman who had no other option." She said, "No, a woman who had every option and chose the one that was exactly right. There is a difference. And I am so proud of you, I cannot find the words for it." She drove down that weekend. She stayed for 2 weeks. She cooked and she organized, and she sat with me in the evenings, and she did not once ask me to explain my choices or justify my feelings or perform a version of grief or healing that was more comfortable for her to witness. She filled the space, completely, without performance. The way my mother has always filled space with the total, unhurried, unconditional weight of someone who is simply, entirely, there. It was the first time in years that someone's presence had felt like actual presence, and not the performance of it. The divorce proceedings took 7 months. Greg Holloway filed aggressively. He moved to characterize my infusion documentation as evidence of premeditation and bad faith conduct during the marriage. He argued that I had planned the divorce while accepting Derek's support during treatment. Ellen's response brief addressed this argument in 11 pages that were, I say this as a fellow attorney, masterful. The central argument was this: a spouse who documents the pattern of abandonment during a life-threatening illness is not acting in bad faith. She is acting in survival. The documentation is not evidence of a scheme. It is evidence of a woman who understood that her word alone would not be enough, and who took the steps necessary to ensure that the truth had receipt. Greg attempted to depose Nina about her knowledge of my planning. Ellen objected on attorney-client grounds, and the deposition was quashed. He attempted to argue that the house should be considered marital property on the grounds that we had lived in it together for 3 years. Ellen presented the deed, dated 2 years before our first date, with my name only, and the motion died in committee. At one point during the proceedings, Greg requested that Derek be allowed to explain, for the record, the context and complexity of the infusion absences. Ellen said, in the flat and pleasant tone she uses when she is about to do something surgical, "Of course. Please have your client describe, with specificity, what support he provided during each of the 6 chemotherapy infusions. Please have him account for his whereabouts during the 9 hours and 14 minutes documented in my client's records." Greg withdrew the request. The settlement was finalized in May. I kept the house. I kept my retirement accounts, my professional accounts, my car. Derek kept his corresponding assets. The marital investments accrued over 3 years were split according to a formula that Ellen negotiated cleanly and without drama. Derek returned his key on a Tuesday morning, left it on the front step in an envelope, and drove away. I stood at the window and watched him go, and I felt something I had not expected to feel, which was nothing. Not relief, not grief, not satisfaction, nothing. The clean, complete nothing of a situation that is simply over. Carol called twice more during the proceedings. I did not answer. I saved both voicemails to the documentation folder. In the second one, she said, very quietly, "I never understood why you were always so cold with me, Vivian. I tried my best. I always tried my best." Reserved, she would have said. Cold, distant. I would say, careful, watching. Building something in the gap between what appeared fine and what was fine, which is where I had been living for 3 years, and which is where I did my best and most necessary work. Ashley sent one text. It said, "You broke my brother's heart, and I will never forgive you for that." I did not reply. There are texts that contain their own complete answer in the sending of them, and that was one. It is June. 8 months after the bell. I live alone in the house I have owned for 12 years. My mother visits every 6 weeks and stays in the guest room, which I have furnished properly now, a bed she actually likes, curtains she helped me choose, a small reading chair by the window that she claims is the most comfortable chair she has ever sat in, and which she is not wrong about. Nina comes on Thursday evenings. My colleague James, who rearranged his entire caseload to cover my clients during treatment, and never once mentioned it or made me feel the weight of the favor, has become one of the most important people in my life. I am in remission. Dr. Owen says my scans are clean. I have a monitoring schedule that I keep with the same precision I bring to everything, and a medication I take every morning with coffee and note in my phone, date, time, done the same way I note everything that matters. The divorce is finalized. Derek is, by report, seeing someone new. I have no feelings about this that are worth examining. I think about the bell. I think about it often, actually more than I expected to. Not with drama, with something quieter. With the specific satisfaction of a person who built something carefully over a long time and then, at the exact right moment, placed it where it needed to go. Timing is the whole thing in contract law. You can have the strongest case in the world and lose it by moving too soon or too late. You produce evidence at the moment when its meaning is clearest, when the gap between what someone has claimed and what they have actually done is most visible, most undeniable, most complete. I rang the bell first. The bell was 18 weeks of showing up, of sitting in the chair, of getting through it. The bell was mine. No one could share in the ringing of it who had not been there for the treatment that earned it. And no one from the Marsh family had been there for more than fragments of the treatment. Then Martin Cole, with his manila folder, in the doorway. The papers were the answer to the performance. They were the document that said, "You told everyone you were devoted. Here is what the record shows. Here is what 9 hours and 14 minutes of timestamps say about devotion. Here is the difference between what you claimed publicly and what you produced privately, preserved in detail. And I am handing it to you on the day of my final infusion, so that you will understand, with complete and irrefutable clarity, that the woman you underestimated was paying attention the entire time. That is the whole story. I want to speak to you directly before I finish. To whoever is watching this and recognizing something in it. To whoever knows what it is to be sick and to look at a doorway and to do the math on what the empty doorway means. Your illness is not a logistics problem for the people who love you to schedule around. Your survival is not an inconvenience to be accommodated when it doesn't conflict with something else. The people who love you should not need your sister-in-law's vendor crisis to explain why they were late to your chemotherapy. You are allowed to notice the pattern. You are allowed to take the time to be certain before you act. You are allowed to keep records and to trust what those records tell you, and to make decisions based on what is actually true rather than what the person who is failing you claims to intend. You are not required to perform gratitude for the performance of support. Those are not the same thing. Support is showing up, every time, for the full duration. Not because there isn't somewhere else to be, there is always somewhere else to be, but because you have decided, clearly, that this is where you need to be, and nothing is going to move you from it. I rang that bell on my terms, with the person who had actually been there. I handed the papers to a man I had never met, and I turned and I said, "Let's go get lunch." And I walked out into October air that was cold and clean and entirely mine, 3 times. The bell, loud and clear. That is enough. That has always been enough. If this story stayed with you, if you know what it is to look at an empty doorway and do the math, leave a comment. Tell me your story. I want to hear it. Type "I rang it anyway" if you know exactly what that means. If you are new here, subscribe. There is another story in the description that I think you need today. Thank you for being here until the very end. That was my story.